She saw them, yeah. We all kind of waved.
Okay.
She actually knew that.
Welcome to Moshe.
Thank you.
Shalom. And Aryeh, of course, is here. And Zahava, I see, is watching. And I know that Yael said she might join us later. And Katie is supposed to be online. And my mother, of course, who watches every week. And everyone else is joining us. So Shalom Aleichem to you and to Zahava. There's Katie. So we're learning from lesson 5 in the second part of the Likutey Moharan, which turns out the longest lesson in the Likutey Moharan. And at some point I knew it was going to get a little, I don't know what you call it, intense, deep, out there, and we're about to get there. So I spent most of my prep time for the class going through all of these pages, all of this, literally reading all of this in order to get to a section where, I'll summarize this when we get to it, but really where I think we can continue with some logic. So apparently, I know that Chabad Hasidus does this a lot, at least the Alter Rebbe does this. He starts off with, why did we receive the Torah at Mount Sinai, and then he'll spend 50 pages saying, but before, sorry to fall?
Yeah, I think it's okay now.
We're on the couch. She's relaxing. But before we get to that, we have to preface it by saying, why did Hashem create the world? And before we get to that, and this is how the Alter Rebbe's Maimarim go. So you end up like really going deep into everything, and then at the end he'll say, so after we've learned all that, now you understand why, one second, I think there was settings supposed to sit here. I have no idea. Okay. I know there was something in the beginning to make the light brighter. He said, now that we've done that, you'll understand why we received the Torah at Mount Sinai. So Rabbi Nachman follows a little different path. What Rabbi Nachman does is many times he goes into something very deep, and then he goes into that deeper and deeper and deeper and brings text proofs, and that's what he's doing here. Now, we started off this lesson where he said that all of the Torah and the mitzvot Shalom Aleichem, Yossi. All of the Torah and the mitzvot came to teach us emunah. This is where the lesson begins. That they all came to teach us emunah, and that sometimes there are afflictions that people suffer. And the reason that they don't heal from them is because of a lack of emunah. And then he talked about fixing a person's emunah. How do you fix your emunah? You go to the tzaddik, and the tzaddik gives you advice. And you talked about crying out from the deepest part in your heart being a place where your thoughts are clear. Mate Esther, Shalom Aleichem. And then we got to this idea last week of emunah nefula. So Rabbi Nachman has this idea that he's mentioned in a different lesson of yirah nefula, fallen fears. And here he has emunah nefula, which is fallen emunah. I took the note and I stuck it aside, so I just want to dedicate the lesson to the memory of Akiva Moshe ben Reuven and Chasha Shifra Halevi Goldberg, and the refuah of Mechavuta Aaron ben Chanaliba, and everyone else who needs a refuah, and the shidduch and parnasa, and everything, and healthy children, and everything everyone needs. Without Hashem, they should get in the merit of our learning these Torahs. So, what is yirah nefula? It's when you fear the government or an animal. Those are the examples that he gives. So it's a type of fear that's not a fear of Hashem. It's a fear of this world, I guess you could say. And Carlos is also joining us. And so how do you fix the fallen fear? So the easiest thing is if you have a fear of the government, or maybe I'm trying to think, AI is a big thing these days, and people send me stuff. My wife sent me something, you have to watch this, and how AI is going to destroy the world. And it doesn't really bother me. I mean, Iran wants to destroy the world, Hamas wants to destroy the world, everyone wants to destroy the world. Can't live in that place. But let's say you're scared of that all the time. That would be a fallen fear, for example.
What about what we just experienced with COVID?
I think the reaction of governments would be a fallen fear. And then many people followed along. I think in retrospect, I was very against everything basically that was going on. And I think in retrospect, people will realize it was an overreaction, but whatever, that's very political still these days. I'm talking about on an individual level. So let's say you were scared of COVID, and people did die from COVID or complications of COVID or whatever it is, we'll find out one day. But the fear is the problem. You shouldn't have the fear. The only thing that you need to fear is fear of Hashem, which is not really fear of Hashem, it's really awe of Hashem. Because there's fear of Hashem, meaning if I do this, I'm going to burn in hell, and I don't want to burn in hell, so I don't want to do this. But awe of Hashem is, I don't want to do this because it will disconnect my relationship with Hashem, and I don't want that disconnection. So we have now emunah shlema, we have complete faith in Hashem, and we have emunah nefula, fallen faith in Hashem. So fallen faith in Hashem would be like, yeah, sure, I keep Shabbos and I go to shul, but I don't really think that Hashem can help me with whatever problem it is in my life. But whatever is a fallen emunah nefula, which we know the idea of the Ein Sof, the endless light of Hashem, which is put in this finite world, which it doesn't make any sense. If it's infinite, how can it come into a finite space? So there's this Kabbalistic concept, which you learned about in one of the previous classes, about the broken vessels. So very simple. If I were to take this cup and fill it, seal the top and push air into it, eventually it would break because it couldn't handle the amount of air that was going to it. And so here we're talking on a spiritual level, we have this light that comes into this finite world. It creates these broken vessels. The broken vessels are hidden sparks of holiness that are all around the world. They're elevated when a person does a mitzvah. And the same thing is with fallen emunah. So there's this concept that when we, instead of having faith in Hashem, don't really have faith in Hashem, it creates an emunah nefula, a fallen emunah, and then these fallen emunahs kind of like drop all around the world and are hidden, and they create a balance in the scale of how the world reacts to, I guess in general, just how the world reacts, but specifically towards the Jewish people. And when there's a lot of emunah nefula, so then the Jews suffer. And when the Jews get their act together and they start believing in Hashem, then the world comes and supports the Jews. And the non-Jewish nations of the world, which we know, if we just look at the United Nations, who has the majority of the power in the world, however many countries there are there, 395 something countries in the United Nations, there's Israel and usually everyone else, Mauritania or some country that's a tiny little island in the middle of the Pacific supports us, or something like that. And then the United States, when they're in the mood, they support us. And so we can see that who has the power in the world? The non-Jewish nations, not the Jews. But if we take the example of the Six-Day War, where in May 1967, everyone over here, or the majority of the people thought there's going to be another Holocaust. The majority of the world thought the Jews are finished. And here, 6 days later, in June 1967, the whole world changed its view of Israel. And this is the emunah switching. And according to the way Rabbi Nachman teaches it, what happened in 1967 was there was a lot of emunah nefula. There was a lot of fallen emunah. And after, the door is locked.
No, I think you got to push it the right direction.
Oh, that's Korach.
Oh.
I guess. Yeah. Ari, just turn the bolt so that it stays open, please. We have a chair for him?
Yeah, here.
Okay. Ari, are you coming?
Yeah.
Hi, Korach.
I go out.
Come.
You able to open the door?
No, the door must have locked. It's an automatic lock, so it must have locked itself. No. This is 15. I told you to bring 12.
You said
Part 2, lesson 73 to 125. I said we're learning lesson 5 in part 2.
Okay.
Anyhow, next time. It's okay, I'm still explaining things, so we haven't gotten to the text yet. I'm explaining this idea of emunah nefula, of a fallen emunah. So just like there's fallen fears, there's fallen emunah, and when there's a lot of fallen emunah, then the non-Jewish nations of the world have more power. When the Jews start believing in Hashem and not believing in people, I guess you could say, then the emunah switches. And what happens? It creates converts. This was this new concept I'd never heard before that Rabbi Nachman brought, that all these converts come now to the Jewish people because they look at the Jews and they say, there's where the true emunah is, and it changes the way of seeing the world, and it creates two types of converts. Convert before and convert bekoach is what he called it. So you have bekoach is in potential, and before is an actual convert. And now we're continuing from that place where we left off. And now he goes, this is where I was saying, he gets very, very deep into these granular concepts. And I don't want to get stuck there because it's boring. And it's hard to extract like the main point from it.
How can you think that he says boring?
I don't know, I can read it for you, see if you fall asleep or not.
I like top and seed, like vanilla extract.
Yeah, exactly. So we're going to go through it, and I'm going to explain it as we go. But I'll read a little bit of the text in the beginning. So Yivaeru she'agelim hana'asim me'aliyat nefilat ha'emunah hem kashim ke'tzarat. He's going to explain now that the converts that are created from the elevating of the fallen emunah are difficult like leprosy, tzarat. Umachnisim ga'ava b'Yisrael, and they bring pride into the Jewish people. הגורמים למנהיגי ישראל שאינם כשרים להתגאות בחרב הגאווה ולהיות מזיקי עלמא, that cause the leaders of the Jewish people that are not so kosher to be haughty with the sword of pride and to cause damage to the world. So I don't think that he's literally saying someone who converts is causing the Jewish people to become diseased, which is essentially what he's saying here, because that goes against Judaism. That doesn't make any sense. So Judaism is a religion that once somebody converts, we embrace the convert to the point where you're not supposed to ask them any questions. You're not supposed to say, oh, so you converted. Well, what brought you to converting? I heard a lesson by Rabbi Ari Tzvi Rosenfeld, who was one of the big Breslov rabbis in America. Apparently, he's given credit for basically pulling Breslov out of nowhere back into the world. And he has all these lessons online in English.
Long red hair, right?
I don't know if he had red hair. You see him with a hat and a little trim beard. He'd passed away 1980 something, I think, or early 90s. But there's lots and lots of recordings, and they're online. So he said, in one of the lessons, he says, Judaism is so sensitive to converts that if you need a converter for the electricity, you can't ask a convert to give you the converter. And it made an impression on me. We have many converts and potential converts, and people probably I don't even know they're converts come to my Shabbos table, and I never ask them, unless they want to share their story, I never ask them anything. So I'm sure that Rabbi Nachman knew this as well, obviously. And when he's saying this, he doesn't mean that the person is bringing something bad into the Jewish people. He's saying that when people convert into the Jewish people, it's the leaders of the Jewish people that are the problem, not the converts. And here is the rule regarding what was explained above. By elevating this fallen emunah, this creates converts. Right? Because these converts are made. Oh, is the door again?
Yeah.
You didn't turn it? Or it turned itself back? Okay.
Who are these characters?
Turn the bolt, Moshe, so it doesn't close again. These converts are created by collecting the fallen emunah. Somebody came to the class, so they wanted to steal okay.
It was just.
They always leave these fancy bikes out here, and I'm thinking, wow, it's too easy to steal.
Moshe, who was it?
There was nobody there.
Eliyahu Nabi. It's okay. So by picking up these fallen emunah, this creates converts. שזה בחינת קטנות האמונה שנקראת צדק שהיא מידת הדין. That this is the smallness of the emunah that's called the tzedek, which is the attribute of din, which is judgment. Al kein hem mizakim liYisrael. So that's why these converts cause damage to the Jewish people. מבחינת האמור בגמרא, קשים גרים לישראל כספחת. So this is quoting the Gemara from Kiddushin. The converts are difficult for the Jewish people, like an illness. Dahainu kamo tzarat sheba, or like leprosy. Sapachat hainu makot. Sapachat, which is illness, like hitting, like punishment. B'chinat makot muflaot hanal, like the wondrous suffering is mentioned above. So now he's making a connection where he started in the beginning, and he said there's illnesses and suffering that people suffer that they can't heal from it because they have a lack of emunah. ונעשים על ידי נפילת האמונה, כנ"ל מחימת שאלו הגרים נעשים מלקיטת נפילת האמונה. And these converts come about from the falling of emunah, because these are the converts that were created by picking up the fallen emunah. Okay, I want to continue because you see, he gets very deep into the stuff. So what does he say here? He says the converts come into the Jewish people, and when somebody converts, and here he says it right here, נמצא שהגאווה דקדושה של ישראל נפלה עליהם ושם נתמעט ונעשית גאווה ממש. So he says, what happens when these converts come into the Jewish people? They bring with them basically the attitude of somebody that grew up in a nation that wasn't being oppressed. And even if they were being oppressed, they weren't being oppressed as Jews. And many people grow up, they're Swedish or they're American or whatever they are, and we're not talking about Jews that grow up in these countries, and they have a certain amount of pride that they bring along with them. And even though they convert and they become a Jew, they still bring that pride with them. Now, it's not the fault of the convert that they're bringing that with them, but this affects the leaders of the Jewish people who didn't do the work on themselves that they're supposed to, and as a result, they become haughty. The leaders of the Jewish people, not all of them, but certain ones become haughty as a result of these converts. So I guess in Rabbi Nachman's mind, the Jewish people were I kind of would like to ask him, weren't the Jewish people haughty? Like now we're having Parshat Korach. Isn't that being haughty? Here we have it in biblical times. We didn't need any converts. But I don't know, maybe they would say there was the Eruv Rav. It would be the Egyptians that joined the Jewish people. I have no idea. This is something that's not clear to me. But what is clear to me is this idea of pride. And that, with every lesson, I want to pull out something practical that we can use. And if he's saying, so the problem with converts is they're bringing in this pride, and we used to have the pride of being a Jew, and now we have pride mamish. This is exactly what he said in the sentence I read before. And he says, if the leaders haven't worked on themselves, so then they become full of themselves. And those aren't the type of leaders that we want. No, the Knesset is not the leaders of the Jewish people. They're the politicians that lead the state of Israel. The leaders of the Jewish people are the rabbis who are supposed to hopefully give us leadership. In the Hasidic world, there's rabbis. In the Litvish world, there's the Gadol Ador, which is the big rabbi of the generation. And those are the rabbis that are supposed to give us leadership. And through this, that this pride, not the pride of being a Jew. Like if there's somebody who they tell him you get on a plane and they say take off your kippah, and you say I'm not taking off my kippah. They say in this plane you can't wear kippahs. That's the rule in our country. Now that you're on a plane, you got to take off your kippah, and the person says no, I'm not taking off my kippah. I'm not taking off my titiot. I'm proud to be a Jew. So that would be Jewish pride. But here he's just talking about pride in a bad way. And he's saying that these converts bring this into the Jewish people, not that they bring it in, but somehow the leaders of the Jewish people, I guess, there's stories of Roman generals and the children of emperors, and maybe even Roman emperors themselves. It's hard to know the truth, that converted to Judaism. And so you can imagine, let's take a president of the United States, and he says, I want to convert to Judaism. And he becomes, let's say Barack Obama, who wasn't so loved here in the state of Israel. But he says, you know what, I really love the Jewish people. I love the Jewish people so much. I and my family are becoming Orthodox Jews. And he actually becomes an Orthodox Jew. We over here would be like having celebrations for him. There'd be fireworks going off for him. That's the type of pride that these rabbis are getting from converts. It's not that the converts are bringing it in, but the fact that we see somebody converting causes the rabbis to be proud of themselves. Now, somebody who really worked on themselves, that whatever it is that comes to you, there's no reason to be proud of it. The only pride that you can really have within yourself is when you know that you conquered the Yetzer Hara. That's something you can be proud of, at least for a short amount of time. Don't spend too much time on it. It's just the Yetzer Hara coming in a different way. Right, in Hayom Yom, which is the daily Chabad teaching, there was something a couple of days ago about the Yetzer Hara behaving like a tzaddik, and the Yetzer Hara having a Hasidic Yetzer Hara. So how does the Yetzer Hara behave like a tzaddik? he says, oh, you need to do this mitzvah, and you need to do that mitzvah, and you need to get up earlier, and you need to daven longer, and you need to change your tefillin, and it starts making you crazy. And you basically burn out of religion by trying to be so religious. That would be the tzaddik Yetzirah. The Hasidic Yetzirah would say, why should you sit and daven for an hour when you can learn Hasidus for an hour? Daven for 10 minutes, learn Hasidus. That's the real thing, right? So that's the Hasidic Yetzirah. So were you to conquer one of the Yetzirahs, the many forms of the Yetzirah, that's something to be proud about. But let's say a person is successful in business, that's the easiest, clear test that there's nothing to be proud about. And that's one of the hardest things, where if a person is a famous musician or a movie star or maybe even a doctor, a surgeon or something, all of these people are worshipped in some way or another or appreciated in a very deep way. You know, a surgeon that saves somebody's life, I know I have a friend that's a surgeon. He does like heavy-duty tumor remover surgery. He shows up to shul with these fancy bottles of vodka and whiskey and all this stuff, and he says, it's just from the patient. You know, the surgery works, so they brought me this bottle. I'm not allowed to take tips, but I'm allowed to take alcohol. And so this person could come home and say, you know, I'm a really good surgeon. I mean, look, I spent all these years studying, and I'm so good, and I saved this person's life. But especially if you're a religious Jew, you have to know that you were the tool for Hashem to save the person's life. And the same thing on the other way around, because the same friend of mine, the first time somebody died on the operating table, he was in a severe depression. It's like, I killed her. I said to him, you know, get a hold of yourself. Hashem killed her. You didn't kill her. You tried to save her life. She happened to die on the table. Did you do something wrong? No, but I probably could have done something better. So that's really the Yetzer Hara coming, and that's a place of gaiva. That's a place of pride. When it comes to business, you know, people will say to you, wow, you were so successful. You built this multi-million-dollar business, and look at this car you have, and look at this house you have, and for men, you say, look, this wife you have, and the children and everything, you got a plane. You're a success. That's a really hard test to live through. That's why the Lubavitcher Rebbe said that the test of wealth is much harder than the test of poverty. Test of wealth, even though it's not easy, it's easier because you have nothing. So you say to Hashem, I need help. I mean, I have nothing. Where am I going to get any money from? I have no money. So that's a test of davening and asking Hashem. But imagine you have $50 million sitting in the bank. You never have that problem. You never have not enough money. Your kid gets married. You spend $100,000 on the wedding. You still have $49,900,000 in the bank. Probably overnight it made the $100,000 back in interest or whatever. It's not your problem. Your problem is the other side, is the pride. Because when you have all that money, then people say, oh, you're so successful. Come, I need your advice. They'll take your advice for anything when you're in that situation. And that's the problem of the rabbis in our lesson here. That here you have all of these converts coming into the Jewish people. They're coming as a result of the Jewish people getting their emunah act together, which is creating converts, which is they're coming, and they're coming from a place of the nations of the world that have all the power. So the rabbis are saying, look at us. Well, look at how awesome we Jews are. Everyone wants to join us. And that's a problem. Because he said that it leads to ni'uf. It causes, first of all, mizikei alma, damage to the world, and it leads to ni'uf. Now, ni'uf, you know, is adultery because we have it in the Ten Commandments. It's lo ninof. What is it, the 9th or something like that? You know, we have the two sides. We have the side that's between us and Hashem, and the other side that's between us and other human beings. And so, don't commit adultery is there. And he says, the adultery, where does adultery come about? It comes about through pride. And if you think about it, it makes a lot of sense, because if a person is married and they have a family, and they decide, instead of controlling themselves and getting a divorce and maybe marrying somebody else, they decide to have an affair while they're married, that comes from a place of pride. Even if you have, like some sex problem, it's still comes from a place of pride. And this pride brings about one of the worst transgressions that a person can do, which is infidelity in a marriage. Through pride of these leaders of the generation, they increase the desire for adultery in the world. Because pride and adultery are dependent upon one another. And as it's written, that what did I do with my translation here? I had it somewhere. I thought I had it. I think I have this translation here. I must have left it somewhere. The wife of somebody else. I don't remember the exact translation here. כל אדם שיש בו גסות הרוח לבסוף נכשל באשת איש. Okay. Anybody who's haughty, in the end, will stumble over adultery. But amdu zot pasuk zeh, and the rabbis learned it out from this verse that I read before. V'nefesh yikara v'gavtanit, and a precious soul, and a proud soul, nitzudet al yedei eshet, is trapped through through adultery. Through pride brings about adultery, which is the seal of the evil intention, of the evil energy that's in each of us that we have to fight against. Okay, let's continue a little bit.
It sounds somehow as being external, but I guess it's
completely internal.
Yeah.
So the Sitra Acha is very important, because without it, there'd be no purpose for this world to exist. The world is a place of good and evil, and it's made for us to be tested in a physical soul, in a limited place. In a physical body with an infinite soul in a limited place, and we have to have these tests. If a person really doesn't have the Yetzer Hara, there's no reason for them to live. And in the Tanya, it talks about the tzaddik. What is a tzaddik amor? It's somebody who has vanquished the Yetzer Hara, not destroyed it, but turned it to serve the Yetzer Hara Tov. But still the Yetzer Hara is there. So if the Yetzer Hara is there and it's serving the Yetzer Hara Tov, so you might get angry that people are not keeping Shabbos as they should be, and that would bring you to, in a very kind and nice way, your anger would bring you to being nice, to helping people keep Shabbos. But if you're angry at people not keeping Shabbos, then it's just the Yetzer Hara. It's not the Yetzer Hara serving the Yetzer Hara Tov. So basically he's saying, okay, we have this pride coming into the leaders of the generation, and the basic adultery comes from pride. So if there's more pride, there's more adultery. And that's what he's trying to say here. Yeah.
The Gemara, it sounds like the Gemara just says that converts are like sapachat. That's all the Gemara says. But
Right.
the Nachman is taking it to mean that the sapachat is haughtiness, and haughtiness then kind of goes to the leaders, and then the leaders, if there's haughtiness, will then create a space for niyuv.
That part I don't understand about the converts being sapachat. So if we go back, it says kashim gerim liYisrael kesapachat. That is that converts are hard for the Jewish people, or a difficult thing for the Jewish people, like a disease.
So it seems like the flow, right, is that the disease equals haughtiness, which is something which the
So, no, 1 second. The converts are not the disease, and that's important to distinguish.
okay.
What I was trying to say is that the rabbis are essentially the disease.
What
The
is
manhigei ador, that's what he said, the leaders of the generation. And he doesn't say all of them. He says the ones that didn't work on themselves. So the example that I gave was, imagine somebody, of many famous people, let's say the entire country of Norway decides they're going to convert to Judaism, right? And like the Kuzari, which we don't know if it really happened, but that idea that the king says, oh, I want everyone to be Jews, and everybody decides to be Jews. For whatever reason, look, we have this crazy thing in South Korea, where more people learn Gemara in South Korea than anywhere in the world. It's required, apparently, it's translated to Korean, and it's required in the schools. And in Singapore, they now have a national draft for the army, although I don't think Singapore ever fights in any wars, has any big border problems, because they looked at Israel and they said, what makes the Jews so special in Israel? It's national service. So everyone's trying to figure out, certain nations are trying to figure out, how do we emulate the success of the Jews? But now if we turn that around, and we Jews, we know we're a small group in the world, we're very influential in the world, but imagine South Korea now says we're all converting to Judaism. We as a nation would feel a certain amount of pride, but especially the leaders of the generation. And he says those she'enam kesherim, that those are not so kosher.
So what is the source, and what's Rabbi Nachman's kind of take on it, and what's the
here? This is the connection. So we, as a result of fixing the fallen emunah, it creates converts. Converts come into the Jewish people. The rabbis that didn't work on their ego are proud.
So this is all Rabbi Nachman. No, there's no Gemara on this, or there is a Gemara?
No, he's using the Gemara as a proof for explaining his idea.
What does the Gemara say?
Gemara says, "Kashim gerim liyisrael kasapachat."
Okay. And then the rest. So the rest is Rabbi Nachman, but that is the Gemara.
And he's saying, that's the only quote from the Gemara.
Okay.
He's saying, what is the sapachat? What is the sickness that's coming in the Jewish people? It's pride. But it's not pride from the converts, it's pride as a result of converts.
It's just interesting how that he's taking it in that direction, but...
Yeah, I mean, I told you, I never know what's coming up. I turn the page and like, what? What is he saying here? But the main point that we can get out of this is pride. So he says, and now, how far does pride go? Pride goes to the point of destroying the trust of a family. When the husband decides to cheat, or the wife decides to cheat, that is the end of the family. And I guess in a sense you could say, he doesn't say it here, but there must be other consequences along the way. The children now don't have faith in relationships, and I don't know where it leads to, but it's something that's so serious. He says, this is terrible. Here's what's happening. So here we're fixing our emunah, which is what we want to do, but it's creating these converts, which are coming into the Jewish people, which is making certain rabbis that are the leaders of the community that didn't work on their ego proud of themselves, and that pride is then trickling down to the nation. And since adultery comes from pride, now we've got all this adultery going on in the Jewish people from something that we thought was good. That's what he's saying. Now he obviously Rabbi Nachman had a clear vision for where he was going with the lesson, but for me it gets very granular. Then the next thing he talks about, I'll just continue going step by step, like moving forward until we run out of time this week, and then next week I think we're just going to skip most of this, or I'll go over very quickly. So he says, now we want to talk about tefillin. Let me just read the intro to this paragraph here. לאחר שבאר את פגם הנעשה על ידי הגרים הנעשים מנפילת האמונה. After he explains the damage that's created through the converts that are made from the uplifting of the fallen faith in Hashem, V'al yadam yesh cherev ga'ava, and through them there's a sword of pride. Lemefarsamim shel sheker, nimshol al am dal, from well-known, here he's talking about the leaders of the generation who are now going to peddle lies and rule over a weak nation. And this brings the desire for adultery into the Jewish people. He's going to explain how we're saved from this through the protectors of the land, Shehem Talmidei HaTzadik, which are the students of the Tzadik, V'zeu Sod Tefillin. And this is connected to the secret of tefillin. So I'm going to summarize this because it gets really, really deep into this. What is the purpose of tefillin for us? So we talked about going to the graves of tzaddikim, and yesterday I went to the Zviller for the first time. I have things to daven for, and I said, you know what, I talk about this all the time. It's time to get my Jewish behind over there. And it was quite an experience. So there's a men's side, there's a women's side. I'm with my wife, so she's been there many times. She goes every week. She's like, okay, you go here, you take a candle, you do this, you do that. And what do we go to the graves of tzaddikim for? Because there's a certain power in the place where tzaddik is buried, and you do it, you're davening in the merit of the tzaddik, which kind of gives your davening a little extra special push. What is the purpose of tefillin? The tefillin are there to ground us. So when we're davening, and I mean really, in an ideal world, we would be wearing tefillin all the time. All the time. There's people that I know wear tefillin all day long. I personally think that it's a big mistake. You've got to be on such a high level to wear tefillin all day. You have one wrong thought. You're basically, it's like the Holocaust. When people say, if people don't accept gay people, it's a Holocaust. And you don't accept immigrants, it's a Holocaust. And everything's a Holocaust. The Holocaust loses its significance. If you wear tefillin all the time, the tefillin loses their significance. You get used to it. You put it on for 45 minutes, an hour every morning, it has a certain power. And what's the power of the tefillin? It's supposed to ground you. It's supposed to ground your mind, ground your heart, so that you can daven. And he says that's the fixing for this pride that comes into the Jewish people through all these people converting because we uplifted our emunah. He says now we put on tefillin. And the tefillin helps to ground us, and it helps to ground our pride. I mean, there's the story of a guy, it's in the Gemara, I believe, that he wanted to try every prostitute in the world. You know the story already. Because he went to yeshiva. I didn't go to yeshiva.
You want to do what?
He wanted to try every prostitute in the world.
Oh.
That was like his hobby. You know, today he would have an Instagram and TikTok channel. He'd have 25 million followers and something, but in those days he just had some money, and this was his thing. He traveled around, and it's, for a Jew, it's a pretty disgusting hobby to have, to try out all the prostitutes. He went to one that was like the most expensive prostitute, and now I don't know if I remember the story. So there's one story about tzitziot where she asked him, "What are these tzitziot?" And he's like, "That's to remind me to keep the commandments," and it reminded him to keep the commandments, and he kept them. And there's another story, it might be the same story, where he farted, he passed gas, and she was like, "That's disgusting," and he ended up like dying at that moment, but he did tshuva the moment before. So the tefillin are there to remind you to not get to those places. And if our problem is a matter of gaiva, is a matter of pride, then the tefillin are there to ground us. There's a story, I was looking for a story to tell at the end of the class tonight. I'm going to tell a short story about the Baal Shem Tov. But this Rebbe, and now I started with a TS something. I wasn't planning on telling the story, so I didn't remember the Rebbe's name, but it's probably the best, The real Rebbes, they don't want you to remember their name anyhow. So this one Rebbe, he needed to have surgery. He was too old to be given an anesthetic because if he fell asleep, they were afraid he wouldn't wake up. But if he didn't do the surgery, he would die like within a few days. So the surgeon didn't know what to do, and the Rebbe said to him, let me put on my tefillin during the surgery. It says that you're not allowed to sleep when your tefillin are on, and you'll give me the anesthesia, and my body won't feel anything, but I won't fall asleep. And the doctor says, but that's impossible, Rebbe. You know, the whole purpose of a general anesthesia is to make you fall asleep. He said, no, it's impossible for me to sleep with tefillin on. And he put his tefillin on, and he was awake the whole time, and they did the surgery, and he didn't feel anything. And he said, see, I told you can't fall asleep when you have tefillin on. Now, this is the fixing for getting to this place of so much pride that you're willing to basically destroy your marriage for your ego, which is what he says here. And so the tefillin are the tikkun, or the fixing for ta'avat niuf, for the desire for committing adultery. And he goes on and on a lot about tefillin here. He says here, Ki tefillin naasim alidei tikkun ta'avat niuf. And he says specifically, this is the way that you fix this pride. Now, it would be very nice if a person that wanted to commit adultery simply put on the head tefillin and all of a sudden they didn't have that thought anymore. But it doesn't mean that. It means that these are tools in order to help you to ground yourself. Then he goes on a lot about the Shaddai on the tefillin, Hashem's name that's on the tefillin, on the tefillin of the head. And I just want to read this one little perush, and then we're going to end here. Okay, perush. So how did we get here? Masor lechet b'sichlo ki'im ad gvul v'lo yoter. So let's go back for a little bit here. שצריך כל אחד ואחד לצמצם את מוחו ושכלו שלו להניח את המוח לצאת מחוץ לגבול שיש לו. שלא יהיה משוטט המוח במה שאין לו רשות. So he says, when you have your tefillin on, your mind might go to all kinds of places, but your job is to pull those thoughts back in. So if you start thinking about some stupid movie that you saw 15 years ago, this happens to me sometimes. Like, oh, I gotta see a clip on YouTube of that movie. What was that movie? I'm standing there davening Shemona Esrei. That's one of the thoughts that comes to my head. So, it's like you take that thought, he uses the word here, meshotet, which is to like sail off. You bring that sailing off thought back in. You pull the thoughts back in. And that's the power of tefillin. He said, there's things you're not supposed to think about when you have tefillin on. Your thoughts might go there. You pull them back in. He says, so now he gives a pirush. He gives an explanation. Kol echad ve'echad sheyesh lo gvul v'tzimtzum b'yediat elikuto. Every person that has a limitation of their knowledge of godliness, lefi erko v'madrigato, according to their spiritual level and their ability, ki ma shenechshav lekatan b'mala mebchinat mufla mimenu, because what's thought about as something small by somebody who's greater than them, that's on a higher level than them. So right, the person, you might think, well, if I could ever keep Shabbos and really be in Shabbos the whole time, that would be a very high level. You have to go?
No, I know this one.
Yeah, what do you want to say?
No, I just...
Oh, you recognize this?
Yes.
And he says, so for you, that might be a very high level. But for somebody else, they might already be on that level. They're able to be in Shabbos the whole time. But they look at somebody who's on a higher level and they say, but if I could be on Shabbos and be learning the whole time, and the person that can be in Shabbos and learn the whole time, they look at somebody else that's on a higher level. So everybody according to their level. And this is, in general, a very important principle to remember. You might want to be like a tzaddik, or you might want to be like somebody that you admire, but you have to be like you. That is the most important thing, and that's the lesson of Reb Zusha. When he's about to leave the world, and the students say, Reb Zusha, are you worried? He's like, I'm worried. I'm worried where I'm going to go. Am I going to go to hell? Am I going to go to heaven? What's going to happen to me? And the student said, how can you be worried? You're one of the greatest tzaddikim that ever lived. And he said, well, They're going to ask me, was it like Moshe Rabbeinu? And I'll say no. They're going to ask me, was that like Avraham Avinu? And I'll say no. But when they ask me, was that like Reb Zusha? I'm scared that I'm not going to be able to say yes. And that's the point, that everybody has their gvul, tzimtzum, everyone has their limitation, their abilities, and that's where you're supposed to go. You're supposed to go as far as you can. Look, Yael joined us just in time for the Zusha Torah. So every person according to the level, and so we see, let's skip over a little bit because we're going to finish here. You can achieve a conception of Hashem and not anymore. 1 second. היינו בידיעת אלוקות, היינו שכל בריאה ובריאה יש לו די בצמצום גבול מיוחד בפני עצמו בידיעת אלוקות כמו במדרגתו, וזהו שיש די באלוקות לכל בריאה. So every person is able to grasp Hashem on a certain spiritual level, and that's what you should be working on. So now, how did we get to there? We got to there from tefillin. How do we get to tefillin? Tefillin is the tikkun for pride. Pride brought us to adultery. Where did the adultery come from? It came from the converts, not from the converts, but from the pride that was created from the converts that were created from elevating the fallen emunah. And that's where we are right now. Now, if we connect it back to the beginning of the lesson, ultimately, he's coming to tell us that we have to constantly be working on our emunah. And we also have to be working on our relationship with Hashem. Just like Yossi is my favorite example because I saw him just this morning, right? Coming home from a workout, or at least carrying a 6-pack of water and like 6 apples or something. And you work on it. Like I physically see you working on it. And we have to work on our relationship with Hashem as well. It's easy to say, oh, that'll come naturally. I got to work on my business. I got to work on my meditation. I got to work on working out. But the God stuff, that'll come naturally. You have to treat it in the same way. The same thing with emunah. You have to work on your emunah. It's something, in order to have it, you have to work on it. Otherwise, imagine the person sits on the couch all the time, and now they need to lift a heavy sack of beans. Even just to save their life, they need to carry this 20-kilo sack of beans back home, and they can't even lift it up because they don't have the strength. The same thing when you face challenges, you have to have strength in your emunah in order to deal with them. And if you don't work on it, you don't have the strength for it. So you might have physical strength, you don't have emunah strength. So it says the great Rabbi Reb Yerachmiel Moshe of Koznitz told the following story. Once Reb Baruch and with this guy Reb Leibush. So Reb Baruch of Mezhibuz was one of the grandsons of the Baal Shem Tov. He's buried right next to the Baal Shem Tov, and obviously in Mezhibuz. And he was considered the big tzaddik after at the time of the Sir Lublin. So the Sir Lublin, I believe, was like Polish Hasidim, and Reb Baruch was Russian, Ukrainian Hasidim. And so this Reb Leibush was once walking with Reb Baruch, and Reb Baruch is telling stories about his grandfather, the Baal Shem Tov, and he's saying how these wondrous things. And this Reb Leibush, Reb Baruch, he looks at him and he sees he doesn't believe the stories, doesn't believe the wondrous stories of the Baal Shem Tov. So they reached an inn. I guess they were traveling on a wagon. And Reb Baruch says, Reb Leibush goes in to smoke and to have a little drink in the inn. And, whoops, went straight into my water there. Okay. And I'm not going to drink that water. And Reb Baruch says to the driver, keep going. And they leave this Reb Leibush in the inn. He comes out, he's like, where's Reb Baruch? The wagon's gone, Reb Baruch is gone, he has no choice, he doesn't have any money. He has to walk back to Mezhibuz. Takes him hours and hours and hours. It starts raining in the middle of the night. He finally gets, at like 3 o'clock in the morning, he gets to this little rundown hut outside of Mezhibuz. And since he's completely soaked and miserable, he knocks on the door and he sees there's a candle lit. He knocks on the door, And this old Jew answers the door. And he says, what's going on? He said, I was walking with Reb Baruch, and I was traveling with Reb Baruch, and he dropped me off in an inn, and then he abandoned me. He said, you know this guy, Reb Baruch? He's the rabbi here in Mezhibuz. So this old man said, listen, I've been in Mezhibuz for a long time and never heard of Reb Baruch. He said, really? He's like famous. He's the grandson of the Baal Shem Tov. He said, the Baal Shem Tov I've heard of. And he says to him, one time, many years ago, he needed to go see the Baal Shem Tov. And he saw that there's all these people waiting in line. Everybody's got a little kvittel. So the way it works is you would write your note to the Baal Shem Tov with your name, and you would hand it to him, and he would look at it and give you something, a tikkun or daven for you, whatever it was. He said, he sees all these people waiting in line, and he asked the gabbai, when is my turn going to come? And he said, your turn's going to come at midnight. So he said, okay, that was like 6 hours from the time he was there. So he said, fine, I'll go to shul, and I'll say tehillim until midnight. He said, he goes to shul, and who does he see there? The Baal Shem Tov is sitting with his students saying tehillim. And he thinks to himself, I was just in the Baal Shem Tov's, bless you, the Beit Midrash, or whatever, I guess he was at the Beit Midrash. Now he's at the shul. So he goes back to the Beit Midrash, and he sees the Baal Shem Tov is there. And he goes back to the shul, and he sees the Baal Shem Tov was there. And he says, how can the Baal Shem Tov be in both places? And he understood that the Baal Shem Tov could do miracles. And so this Reb Leibush, he was very impressed. And the next morning he goes to Reb Baruch's house, and he says, okay, now I believe the stories of the Baal Shem Tov. I met this old man, and he told me this miraculous story about the Baal Shem Tov. And Reb Baruch says, you should know that there was that man, that old man that told you the miracles, he studies with Eliyahu Navi every night. So he himself is a great tzaddik. And if he's telling you great stories of the Baal Shem Tov, you can believe them. Now, telling stories of the Baal Shem Tov is a segula apparently for everything. So in the merit of the learning, the Baal Shem Tov, of course, Rabbi Nachman was a great-grandson of the Baal Shem Tov, grew up in the Baal Shem Tov's house, because his grandmother was the Baal Shem Tov's daughter, Adel, or Udel, amongst the rest of Chassidim, and she was considered a Rebbe herself after the Baal Shem Tov passed away. Until, I guess, Reb Baruch was from one of the other kids, I'm not sure, but his daughter, Adel, was considered on a very high level.
Who's this, the Baal Shem Tov's daughter?
Baal Shem Tov's daughter, Adel, and Rabbi Nachman grew up in her house. She was his grandmother. And so Rabbi Nachman heard stories of the Baal Shem Tov from the Hasidim that knew the Baal Shem Tov when he was still alive.
So he was the great-grandson?
He's one of the great-grandsons. Yeah, there were many. That's why I say one. But he's one of the more famous ones. Okay. So Yasher Koach, everyone, for making it to the end. Everyone for coming and for sticking around.